Billionaire sees black waitress help his disabled son, then her life changes forever. What would you do if you saw a disabled child freezing in the rain, alone, forgotten? She didn't ask who he was. She didn't care who was watching. A black waitress, worn from a 12-hour shift, stepped outside and made a choice that would change her life forever. What she didn't know was that a billionaire father was watching, and what he did next would shock everyone. This is not just a story about kindness. It's about power, about prejudice, and about how one woman rewrote the rules in a world built to keep her silent. Stay with this one. You're not ready for what happens next. A black waitress shelters a disabled boy in the rain, and a billionaire watches. The storm had been roaring for hours. Rain came down in furious sheets, soaking every corner of Lexington Avenue. The sidewalks were glossy with cold, unkind puddles, reflecting the flicker of failing streetlights and neon diner signs. It was almost midnight. Most people had long fled the streets, but one small figure remained. A boy, pale, thin. Curled in on himself in a battered wheelchair, pushed against the cracked wall of the Lexington diner. His jacket was too small, too thin. Water dripped from his tangled dark hair. His hands trembled as they clutched a frayed blanket, soaked through and useless. Inside the diner, Serena Carter was scrubbing the counter with the kind of tired that had no words. Her arms ached. Her back burned. Her brown skin glistened with sweat after a double shift, and the clock had long ago stopped mattering. But exhaustion had never killed her compassion. She looked up, her breath caught. That boy, alone, shaking, barely visible through the fogged glass. Serena dropped the rag without thinking. She pushed through the front door, and the rain slapped her skin instantly. Cold, harsh, real, she crouched beside the boy, voice soft but firm. "Hey, baby, what are you doing out here? You all right?" The boy flinched. His eyes were wide and blue, filled with something older than his years. His voice was barely audible beneath the storm. "I'm waiting for my dad." Serena looked up and down the street. Empty. Pawn shop lights across the road flickered like ghosts. Not a soul in sight. "Where is he, sweetheart?" He shrugged, pulling the wet blanket tighter. Serena bit the inside of her cheek. She had seen too many kids left like this. Forgotten by people who never should have had the right to raise them. "You can't stay out here like this. Come on, let's get you warm." The boy hesitated. But when Serena gently gripped the back of his wheelchair, he didn't resist. They rolled inside. The warmth of the diner wrapped around them like a quilt. It smelled like old coffee and grilled onions, a safe smell, a lived-in smell. She parked him by the radiator, then fetched a clean towel and draped it over his shoulders. "I'm Serena," she said, kneeling to meet his eyes. "What's your name?" "Daniel," he mumbled. "Daniel," she repeated, smiling. "That's a strong name." He nodded slowly. His lips were blue. She didn't ask for more. She went to the kitchen. Minutes later, she returned with a grilled cheese sandwich, golden and steaming, and a bowl of tomato soup. The kind that stuck to your ribs. The kind that said somebody cares. She placed the plate in front of him and tucked a napkin into his lap. "This one's on me." Daniel's eyes widened. He took a bite. Gooey cheese stretched in long strings. "This is the best thing I've ever had." Serena laughed, low and warm. Good food makes bad days feel a little less heavy. She didn't say what she was thinking. That no child should ever look that grateful for a sandwich. Across the street, hidden beneath tinted windows of a sleek black Bentley, Raymond Holt watched. The billionaire tech mogul, architect of an empire, sat in silence. Eyes sharp, expression unreadable. He had told his son to wait here. Just 10 minutes, he'd said. A phone call with Tokyo investors had run long. He hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected the waitress. His son being fed by a stranger, not just any stranger, a black woman in a stained apron. in a diner that smelled of grease and hard work, and she hadn't asked for anything. She didn't know who Daniel was, didn't know what name he carried, didn't know who might be watching, and yet she had shown him more care in 5 minutes than most people ever had. Raymond didn't believe in kindness, he believed in leverage. In debt, in people earning what they took, but this had shaken something. He dialed a number. Nora, he said into the phone, get to the Lexington diner. No heels, no suits, 20 minutes. Find out everything about the woman who just fed my son. Then he hung up. Back inside, Daniel was laughing, actually laughing, crumbs on his chin, his hands warmed by the radiator and the food. Serena wiped his face gently, like an aunt or big sister might. You're a messy eater, huh? She glanced out the window. Rain still streaked the glass. Her tired bones felt a little lighter. For a moment, this child, whoever he belonged to, had been safe. And that, to her, was enough. But someone else had decided it was the beginning of a debt he never planned to forget. A stranger claims the boy, but the waitress sees through the lie. The bell above the diner door rang sharply, cutting through the warmth like a cold blade. A gust of rain-laced wind followed. Serena turned just in time to see a woman step inside. She didn't look like the regulars. Jeans too clean, hoodie pulled low, ball cap hiding blonde hair. She wasn't dripping wet like most would be on a night like this. She was dry, calculated, and moving with a purpose. Her eyes swept the diner once and then landed squarely on Daniel. There you are, champ, she said, crouching in front of him like she knew him. Time to go. Daniel looked up, confused, still holding the half-empty glass of milk Serena had just poured him. But I haven't finished. You can take it with you, the woman replied with a too-smooth smile. Your ride's waiting. Serena's instincts screamed. She wiped her hands on her apron, stepped closer, and folded her arms. You know him? The woman didn't miss a beat. I'm his aunt. Serena didn't blink. She turned to Daniel. That true sweetheart. She your aunt? Daniel hesitated. Not long, but long enough. His fingers tightened around the napkin on the table. He looked at the woman, then at Serena. His lips parted. Nothing came out. The woman's smile thinned. Serena crouched beside him again, her voice softer now, steady like a mother speaking through a storm. You okay, baby? You sure you want to go with her? Daniel shifted in his seat. His hands gripped the blanket again, tighter this time. She's here for my dad. I guess I have to. The words were hollow, resigned, not a choice, just submission. Serena's chest ached, but she knew this feeling. That helpless place black women lived in every day when instinct told you to fight, but the world warned you not to make a scene. Not when you were a waitress. Not when you were a black woman challenging a white one. Not when the wrong tone could mean a patrol car and a headline. So she nodded slowly, even though every part of her said not to. Hold on, she said, walking behind the counter. She returned with a wax paper-wrapped chocolate chip cookie, still warm from earlier, for the road. Daniel's small hand reached for it, and for the first time that night, he smiled. Thanks, Serena. You're the best, she smiled back, forced but gentle. The woman gripped the wheelchair handles and turned for the door, but right before stepping out into the rain, she glanced back. Not a thank you, not a nod, just a look. And Serena recognized it instantly. A warning. Across the street, the Bentley's headlights flared to life. As they approached, the car door opened before the woman could even knock. She pushed back her hood as she slid Daniel inside. Then she turned to face the man stepping out of the car. Raymond Holt. His broad frame filled the space beneath the diner's neon glow. His expensive coat was damp with rain, but his eyes were colder than the storm. Well, he asked. She's sharp, the woman replied. Didn't buy the aunt's story, almost called me out. Yet you left with the boy. She didn't have a choice, the woman replied. You know how it is. A black woman making noise in a place like that. She would have been the one escorted out, not me. Raymond didn't answer. His jaw tensed, but he understood. She's not like the others, the woman added. I know, Raymond said. He had seen it for himself. The way Serena stepped out into the rain without hesitation. The way she looked at Daniel, not like he was a burden or a responsibility, but like he mattered, like she saw him. She hadn't begged, hadn't postured, hadn't asked for anything in return. That made her dangerous. He opened the car door and slid into the back seat. Name, address, background, he said flatly, everything on her. I want it on my desk by morning. The woman hesitated. Sir, by morning. The Bentley pulled away from the curb, the diner's neon sign shrinking in the rearview mirror. But Raymond wasn't thinking about the traffic ahead. He was thinking about Serena Carter and the quiet power of a woman who gave without expecting, who helped without needing to know who she was helping, and the debt that now weighed on him like a storm still gathering over the city. A billionaire knocks on her door at midnight with an envelope that could change everything. The knock came just after midnight. 3 short raps against the thin wooden door of apartment 2B. In this part of West Fayette Street, knocks that late usually meant trouble. Serena froze. She had just kicked off her soaked sneakers, her socks still squishing with every step. The smell of burnt toast from the neighbor's kitchen crept through the cracks in the wall. Her body begged for sleep, but the sound at the door rooted her to the floor. Nobody knocked at this hour. Not here. Not unless something was wrong. She tiptoed to the peephole. A man stood outside. Tall, broad shoulders. Dark wool coat that looked like it belonged in a courtroom or a Wall Street boardroom, not on her front steps. He didn't fidget. He didn't shift his weight. He just stood there composed and cold as if he already owned the outcome of this moment. Serena didn't open the door. Who is it? She asked, her voice firmer than she felt. A pause. Raymond Holt. The name meant nothing to her. What do you want? To talk? Every instinct told her to walk away, but curiosity had already opened the lock before her hand could stop it. She cracked the door just wide enough to see his face. Sharp jawline, gray eyes like stone. Rain still clinging to his coat, though his shoes were somehow spotless. His presence didn't just fill the doorway, it challenged the space, made her hallway feel too small. I don't know you, Serena said flatly, but you know my son. Her heart skipped. Daniel. She opened the door an inch wider. You were the one watching. He nodded once. I was across the street. She folded her arms. So what, you come to complain I gave your kid a sandwich? No, Raymond replied. His voice was steady, unreadable. I don't believe in charity, but I do believe in debts. Before she could respond, he stepped past the threshold like he had been invited. He placed a thick white envelope on her scratched kitchen table without saying a word. Serena didn't touch it. What is that? A job offer. She blinked. A what? A position at Holt Dynamics, executive liaison, 6 figures. Full benefits, you start Monday. Serena laughed, not out of humor, out of disbelief. You think you can buy me because I gave your son soup? Raymond didn't flinch. I think you don't want charity. That's why I'm not offering it. Her name in his mouth felt too familiar, too strategic. You don't even know me, she said. I know enough. You saw my son, not as an inconvenience, not as a name. You saw him. Serena looked down at the envelope. She didn't need to open it. She knew what 6 figures meant. No more late rent. No more choosing between groceries or the gas bill. No more praying for overtime just to cover a broken faucet. But still, it felt like a trap. You want me to make coffee for rich white men in boardrooms? Raymond's mouth twitched, the closest thing to a smile he'd shown. No, you'd be working directly with me, handling negotiations, public affairs. You're good with people. I need that. Serena snorted. You've got Ivy League interns for that. Exactly. That's why I don't trust them. Silence settled thick between them. The envelope sat like a weight on the table, a door she hadn't asked to be opened. But it was open now. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. A warning from years ago. Never owe these people anything, baby. They don't give without taking. Serena's jaw tightened. Why me? Raymond held her gaze, and for the first time his voice dipped lower. Just enough to sound human. Because you saw my son, not my empire, not my title, just him. Serena exhaled. She looked at the envelope one last time, then picked it up. I'll think about it. Raymond nodded. Good. He turned without another word and left, his footsteps echoing down the hallway like a closing chapter. Serena stood there alone, envelope in hand, heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure if she had just been offered a lifeline or a leash, but deep down she already knew her answer. A black waitress walks into a boardroom and silences billionaires. The lobby of Holt Dynamics was a different universe. Polished marble floors stretched endlessly beneath her feet. Glass walls rose like temples, etched with gold logos and silent power. Everything gleamed, everything judged. Serena Carter stepped inside wearing her best blazer from the clearance rack and a pair of thrift store heels that pinched with every step. Heads turned, but not out of welcome. The stairs were clinical, measuring, cold, she didn't belong, and everyone knew it. But she kept walking. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime and the air grew thinner the higher she went. When they opened again, she stepped into a floor where the silence had teeth. Raymond's office was at the end of the hall. Floor to ceiling, windows spilled daylight across a desk so clean it looked untouched. He didn't greet her with a smile. "You're late," he said, not looking up. "By 2 minutes," she replied, dropping her bag beside the chair across from him. "That's 2 minutes I don't get back." Serena exhaled. "You always this warm and fuzzy, or is that just for me?" Finally, Raymond looked up. His mouth didn't move, but there was the faintest twitch at the corner, something not quite a smile. Before she could say more, the glass door opened behind her. Nora entered, tablet in hand, eyes sharp and unreadable. She scanned Serena from head to toe, then turned to Raymond. "I've prepared the reports for the Orion meeting." Raymond gestured for the tablet without looking. "Leave it. I'll brief her." Nora's eyes flicked back to Serena. "Good luck," she murmured, then walked out. The door clicked shut. Raymond handed the tablet across the desk. "Orion Group. They want to offshore production to cut costs. That means layoffs. Thousands." Serena scrolled through the file, her stomach knotting. "You want me to talk them out of it? I want you to do what you do best. Talk like someone who remembers what it means to have nothing." She looked up, surprised by the bluntness. "You really think I can convince a room full of millionaires to grow a conscience?" "No, I think you can make them fear the fallout." Raymond stood, adjusted his cufflinks, and walked toward the door. "Meeting S in 10. Let's go." The boardroom was glass and steel, cold by design, a power move without saying a word. At the long mahogany table sat 3 men in tailored suits, expensive smiles, arrogant posture. The kind of men who didn't just run companies, they shaped cities. Serena sat beside Raymond, hands calm on the table. Philip Langford led the delegation. 60, white hair, polished like a courtroom villain, he barely looked at her. Raymond opened the meeting. "You're proposing to relocate manufacturing to Taiwan. It saves costs short-term but wipes out entire communities here. We've built this company with those people. You're talking about erasing them." Langford gave a polite, condescending chuckle. "Come on, Ray, it's just business, it's not personal." Serena leaned back slightly, folding her arms. "It's always personal. You just don't feel it from where you sit." Langford glanced at her now, mildly annoyed. "And you are?" "Serena Carter, Holt Dynamics." He gave her the once-over. His eyes said what his mouth didn't. "You're just the help." She didn't flinch. Look, he said, gesturing to his folder, I understand how this sounds. But our responsibility is to shareholders. Serena nodded slowly. Then let's talk numbers. She slid a packet across the table. Charts, projections, risks. And one bold headline, the true cost of greed. You relocate now, sure, you'll save 20% in the first year. But by year 3, labor costs overseas rise. You'll be scrambling. And when the media spins this as American workers betrayed for profit, your brand suffers. You don't just lose dollars, you lose trust. Langford skimmed the first page, face darkening slightly. This is speculation. No, she said calmly. That's analysis, based on what happened to every other corporation that tried this in the past 10 years. Same decisions, same fallout, different zip code. Langford leaned forward, irritation in his jaw. You think you're smarter than my team. Serena met his gaze without blinking. I think I've seen what happens when people like you decide whole neighborhoods don't matter. A beat of silence. Then Raymond spoke. You asked for efficiency. This is it. Make the right call. Langford said nothing. But he took the packet with him when he left. When the door finally shut behind them, Serena exhaled. Raymond turned toward her. I hired you for a reason. Serena gave him a half-smirk. Damn right you did. A black woman gets blamed for a corporate leak, but she fights back with proof. The email hit her desk like a punch to the chest. A confidential financial report leaked to the press. Tens of millions in exposure. Brand damage. Investor panic. At the top of the forwarded chain was her name, Serena Carter. The fluorescent lights above her office suddenly felt too bright, too loud. Her hands trembled as she reread the header. It wasn't hers. She hadn't touched that file, hadn't even been on that server. But in a place like Holt Dynamics, none of that mattered. A black woman in a white tower didn't get presumed innocent. Nora found her first. Sharp, breathless eyes locked in crisis mode. We have a problem, she said. Serena held up the printout. Yeah, I got that. This isn't yours, Nora said. I know, but someone wants it to be. The walls felt closer now, the air thinner. Serena had worked twice as hard, been twice as careful, stayed twice as silent when they expected her to fold. And it still wasn't enough. Who's seen it? Raymond. And the board, Serena's throat went dry. The board. The same room full of men who never looked her in the eye unless she was defending the company or defending herself. She marched to Raymond's office. His jaw was tight, shoulders square. The blinds were drawn, casting hard shadows across the room. Tell me I wasn't wrong, he said quietly. Serena slammed the file onto his desk. This isn't me. He didn't even look at the pages. I want to believe you, but this is serious. The leak, the press, there's talk of criminal exposure. Lawsuits. Serena leaned in, voice low and razor sharp. And let me guess, someone whispered my name because I don't wear the right family crest on my blazer. He didn't deny it. She straightened, pacing. Her pulse pounded behind her eyes. You think I did this? No, Raymond said, but the board does. Serena looked at him for a long beat. So what happens now? We find out who did. It wasn't a promise. But it was a door. That night, Serena and Nora combed through server logs, old emails, digital trails buried beneath passwords and firewalls. At 2 in the morning, they found the break. A secondary account. An internal reroute. A pattern of quiet downloads and suspicious file movements, all traced back to Eric Calloway, a senior executive, 10 years in, clean record, smooth voice, the kind of man who knew how to wear power like a tailored suit and hide a knife behind a smile. By dawn, Serena had a folder thick with evidence. She didn't wait to be summoned. She walked straight into the boardroom. Men in suits turned, expecting an apology, maybe a resignation. They got neither. She stood at the head of the table, folder in hand, eyes unblinking. You made a mistake, she said. One of them, lips thin and lined with doubt, gestured toward the seat. Miss Carter, perhaps you should sit. No, I'm not here to be questioned. I'm here to correct your assumption. She slid the folder onto the table. Emails, bank transfers, metadata logs, all tied to Calloway. Gasps weren't audible, but the shift in the room was real. Calloway sat still, too still. This is a setup, he said. Serena turned to Raymond. Is it? Raymond didn't blink. No, it's not. He stood. Effective immediately, Eric Calloway is terminated. Legal action will follow. Full internal review begins today. He scanned the room. And if anyone else thinks they can move against this company from the inside, let this serve as notice. Silence. Serena didn't smile. She didn't need to. She gathered her papers and walked out with her head high. They had tried to write her out. She rewrote the ending. A black woman's act of kindness becomes a legacy for an entire community. The name on the glass door now read Serena Carter, Vice President of Strategic Development, etched in clean silver letters, permanent, unapologetic. The same hands that once wiped down diner counters now signed off on seven-figure initiatives. The same voice that once asked strangers if they wanted fries with that now spoke in front of boards, press conferences, and national think tanks. But Serena hadn't changed to fit the building. She had changed the building to fit the people who had always been kept outside of it. Under her leadership, Holt Dynamics launched its first equity investment fund for minority-owned businesses, created job programs in neglected neighborhoods, partnered with historically black colleges. And every decision she made, every policy she approved, carried the same fire she had in her eyes the night she stood alone in that boardroom. She didn't just remember the struggle. She built bridges for others to cross it. She hired staff who looked like the people who had never been let in. She sat across from executives who once dismissed her and made them listen. One spring morning, she walked into a campus auditorium where a familiar young man waited near the podium. He stood tall now, shoulders stronger, but still carried the same spark in his eyes. Daniel. He was a freshman at a university that once would have overlooked him, but not anymore. Not with the right hands holding the door open. You nervous? Serena asked. A little, Daniel admitted. You'll do fine, she said, adjusting his collar. You're your father's son, but more importantly, you're your own. He smiled at her with the ease of someone who knew they were loved. You know you're my hero, right? Serena didn't answer right away. Her voice caught in her throat. I just did what anyone decent should do. No, Daniel said, you did what most wouldn't. Behind them, Raymond Holt stood near the back of the room, quiet in a tailored navy suit. His edges had softened over the years. He didn't run the company anymore. He advised, observed. And on days like this, he listened. When Serena walked toward him, he offered a nod. You made this place better, he said. She raised an eyebrow, you admitting that. He gave a faint smile. I'm finally calling you by your first name, aren't I? Serena laughed. It was warm, low, a sound she hadn't made in the early days, because now the space around her had changed, because she had claimed it. That afternoon, sunlight bathed the city as guests gathered in front of a new brick building on West Fayette Street, the Carter Holt Community Center. Inside, classrooms were already filling with youth who would learn coding, business, public speaking. Kids who looked like Serena, who came from neighborhoods like hers, who would be told they belonged long before they had to prove it. She stepped onto the stage beneath a banner bearing her mother's name. Her voice, when it came, was steady. This isn't just a building, it's a promise. That kindness isn't weakness. That doing the right thing still matters. That the door you open for one can be the hallway a generation walks through. She looked into the crowd and saw faces beaming. Some crying, some smiling like they had waited their whole lives to hear someone say that out loud. And at the very back, Daniel clapped the loudest. The boy once left in the rain, now standing in the sun. Sometimes it only takes one simple act of kindness to change not just a moment, but a lifetime. Serena didn't have wealth. She didn't have power. What she had was heart, the kind that doesn't wait for permission to do what's right. And in a world that often overlooks people like her, she didn't just survive. She rose. For herself, for Daniel, and for every voice that's ever been ignored. This story reminds us that doing the right thing may not always come with applause, but it echoes where it matters most. In lives lifted, in doors opened, in dreams passed forward. If this story touched you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to Black Unbreakable, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to know, what did this story mean to you? And stay with us, because in the next videos, we'll continue uncovering powerful stories of Black resilience, tales of struggle, injustice, and breathtaking triumphs you've likely never heard before. Stories that will move you, inspire you, and remind you that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through those who simply refuse to give up.